So the Amazon Conservation Team partners with Indigenous and other forest communities to protect South American forests. Mapping is a key part of this strategy, and in this presentation I'll be talking about how we're collecting data in the field with our partner communities using Open Data Kit and Forest Watcher. So this photo was taken in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in northern Colombia on a mapping expedition with the Kogui people. The Kogui are one of 4 indigenous groups in this mountain range that have a combined population of more than 30,000 people. So as we were walking through these mountains on a 10-day expedition, we passed pre-Columbian stone paths, ruined terraces, sacred ceremonial caves, and indigenous villages that haven't been visited by outsiders for more than 20 years. As we walked, a group of traditional spiritual authorities known as the Mamos, they were with us and they were explaining the importance of all these sites. Also with us was a group of young indigenous people who recorded this information in Android devices using Open Data Kit. So this is just one example of how we're using modern technology to help record ancestral knowledge, helping to pass this information on to new generations, reinforcing traditional land management systems for these people that revolve around a complex network of sacred sites and spiritual payments. So that took place in the mountains, but the focus of our work with the Kogui has been on the Caribbean coast at a threatened sacred site called Habatani Washkaka, which is shown in white on the map to the right. So ACT helped the indigenous people reestablish a presence in this area, and after arriving there, they began to look around at what's happening in the context. So we started interviewing local townspeople, fishermen, small farmers, using Open Data Kit to record the information that we found. One of the things we heard was that there was a bunch of new banana and palm oil plantations in the area that were drying up the rivers. The rivers are no longer arriving in the Caribbean Sea, causing a lot of problem for local fishermen. So the Kogui went in the field, they found these plantations and marked it using ODK, and they found the photographic evidence of this, and they found a lot of really disturbing things like this giant water pump shown in the photo at the bottom, where they dug out this big hole and just sucking up huge amounts of water, creating large irrigation ditches where they're storing this. So this is just one example. We've also, or to explain a bit more, the yellow areas on the map to the right are the plantations, and you could see how these are upstream from this indigenous sacred site, which is all wetlands, so they're literally drying out this sacred site. So now armed with this information, the Kogui can go to local authorities and hopefully get this issue resolved. This is currently in process. They actually just had a workshop over the weekend to present these findings. So this is our first pilot program in Colombia using ODK. But we've since expanded the scope of this work significantly in recent years. So we brought some of the Kogui to the lowland Colombian Amazon to teach the Murul-Muina tribe. They're also commonly known as the Huitotos. They're in southern Colombia and Peru. So we brought the Kogui there to teach them how to use ODK. There's a lot of interest to use it. This is a group that in the early 20th century numbered more than 20,000 people. Following the atrocities of the rubber boom in the early 20th century, there's now less than 5,000 Murul-Muina. So these are a tribe that's still recovering from that cultural shock. So we're working with them to help establish sustainable economic alternatives to destructive activities like illegal mining and logging. So one example of this is a kind of nut that grows in the area called Caquetá. This is a valuable product because it produces an oil that can be used in high-end cosmetics. So using ODK, they're recording the locations of these trees, how much the trees are producing, and then using that information to splice together new varieties of the tree and also monitor the growth of this income generation project. These tribes are also doing a fauna monitoring project. So they're monitoring the locations of mammals, amphibians, birds, fish, and reptiles in the area. So you can see a few examples of the form at the bottom there. At the end, the names of each of the specific animals are in the local language. We're in the process of making a fully bilingual form, which I think is probably the best way to secure the information and make it more accessible to everybody. But this is important because these tribes live in a really important connective area between the Chiribiquete National Park, shown at the top right of this map, and a large indigenous reserve to the south with the border of Peru. So these tribes are now monitoring the presence of animals in this important biological corridor. Close to this area, a bit to the southeast, near the border with Brazil, there live a number of isolated indigenous tribes. So this photo here is a communal longhouse of a tribe that we believe to be the Yoripase. So these tribes fled into the most remote parts of the Amazon rainforest in the early 20th century as they fled the atrocities of the rubber boom. So they've lived there without contact from the outside world for several generations now. You may have heard recently there was a story in the news about illegal miners killing several uncontacted tribe members in Brazil. This is very close to that area in the tri-border area with Peru, Colombia, and Brazil. So illegal mining is a very severe problem in this area as well. There's the river that's closest to these tribes. There's a lot of illegal mining activity, and we've been working with the National Park Service of Colombia and local indigenous tribes to use ODK to monitor the presence of illegal mining, which you can see in the map at the bottom left. So the mining here are alluvial barges where they suck up all the sediment off the bottom of the river and then separate out the gold. Using this information, we built a guard post on the border with Colombia and Brazil, which is now stopping those miners from advancing into the territory of the isolated tribes. Another example is in Brazil. This is in the Xingu, a project we're doing with the Waura tribe. So anybody not familiar, the Xingu is a really interesting area of Brazil, a real cultural center of indigenous cultures in Brazil. We've been working there for several years, helping to establish a new village at the southwest corner of the indigenous territory, which is important because without an indigenous presence there, local farmers are petitioned for that to be canceled as an indigenous territory, which will open up the lands to soy plantations and other types of monoculture agriculture. So we began mapping these lands with this tribe earlier this year, using a combination of satellite imagery maps and Open Data Kit. So we did this mapping around the village. They mapped a lot of interesting variables, which is kind of a combination of fauna monitoring and spiritual mapping. So they marked the locations of actual living animals, but also the spirits of animals the local shaman sees in his dreams. So it's this really interesting combination of the two. We made an expedition to a local sacred site and recorded the significance of a number of petroglyphs. We're also teaching this community forest watcher, bringing global forest watch data to the field where they can go and verify deforestation alerts, which is important. You can see that this community is right at the edge of the indigenous territory, and there's a rapidly advancing frontier of deforestation. Thanks to Global Forest Watch and Jane Goodall Institute for this one. Thank you.
How do you deal with where the aggregate server is and who's keeping track of that information, has access to the information and compiling it and so on? Like, what's the relationship between the local and obviously the umbrella organizations or the foreign NGOs that are involved in helping compile the data?
So we originally had our own private server in our office. We found that the latency was a bit slow coming from South America to North America, so we ended up moving it to Google Apps. And then, so in terms of who's using it, for the most part, we download the information and make the maps ourselves. In the most advanced project case with the Kogui, they're now downloading the information, viewing in Google Earth. But still, if we're making like a polished map for a workshop, we typically do that in-house. But yeah, we're very careful about the information. If there's something very sensitive, for example, in the case of the isolated tribes, if it's something really sensitive, we don't include it in the form. And if we're worried about it, we also keep it in the indigenous language where nobody else will be able to understand it. So that's kind of how we think about it. Yeah, it's always a concern.
Excellent, great. Thank you very much, Brian.